As the Japanese fleet sailed toward Midway, the American task forces set out from Pearl Harbor, knowing that the Japanese were closing in. The American fleet's movements were hidden, relying on the element of surprise and the information provided by the codebreakers. On June 3, 1942, Japanese reconnaissance aircraft spotted American forces preparing for battle. But the Japanese were too confident. They believed the Americans would not be able to launch a counteroffensive in time. Meanwhile, U.S. intelligence had confirmed the location of the Japanese invasion fleet, and Midway's defenders were prepared. American forces had several advantages: radar on their ships, experienced pilots, and knowledge of the Japanese strategy. The first American strike came from the island's bombers, who launched their attacks at the Japanese fleet, aiming to disable or destroy their carriers before they could strike Midway. This was the beginning of the pivotal Battle of Midway. As dawn broke on June 4, 1942, both sides were poised for battle. The Japanese carriers launched their first strike wave against Midway Island, while the Americans launched their own attacks on the Japanese fleet. The Japanese attacked the island's airfields, hoping to neutralize the American defenses, but their efforts were met with fierce resistance from Midway's defenders. At the same time, U.S. dive bombers and torpedo planes launched their own attacks on the Japanese carriers. The first major success for the Americans came when 3 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were heavily damaged in quick succession by American dive bombers. The Japanese had failed to protect their carriers during a critical window, and now their fleet was in disarray. In the span of just a few hours, the Japanese carriers were burning their aircraft destroyed and their offensive capacity shattered. It was a devastating blow, and one that would turn the tide of the war in the Pacific. By the afternoon of June 4, 1942, Japan's once mighty carrier fleet was in ruins. The remaining Japanese carrier Hiryu launched a counterattack on the American carriers, but her strike was repelled by the U.S. fighters, and Hiryu was soon set aflame by American bombs. With the loss of all 4 of their aircraft carriers, Japan's Pacific ambitions were all but destroyed. The Japanese could not replace their losses, not in aircraft, not in pilots, and not in ships. The battle marked the turning point in the Pacific War. While the United States had suffered the loss of the carrier Yorktown, which was sunk by a Japanese submarine, the victory at Midway was a triumph for American forces. The U.S. Navy had decisively beaten back the Japanese offensive, preventing further expansion in the Pacific. The Battle of Midway was a turning point, not just because of the immediate destruction of Japan's carriers, but because of the broader strategic impact. Japan had lost not just ships and aircraft, but also the initiative in the Pacific War. From this point on, the Japanese would be on the defensive. The American victory at Midway meant that the United States now had a clear path to counterattack and begin the long process of reclaiming the Pacific Islands. But the battle's aftermath also highlighted the immense cost of war. The United States had lost a carrier Yorktown and nearly 300 men, but Japan's losses were far more severe. Japan had lost 4 of its most powerful carriers, over 250 aircraft, and hundreds of experienced pilots. These losses crippled Japan's ability to project power across the Pacific. The Japanese Navy would never again be able to mount the same kind of offensive operations that had characterized their early war successes. But it wasn't just about the carriers. The Battle of Midway demonstrated the importance of intelligence preparation and decisive action. American codebreakers had provided crucial information, allowing U.S. forces to anticipate Japanese movements and set the stage for a counterstrike. For Japan, the loss was not just military. It was a blow to morale and the foundation of their strategic thinking. The Japanese had believed their navy was invincible, but after Midway, that illusion was shattered. In the months following Midway, Japan would be forced into a defensive posture, unable to launch any major offensives. The U.S. Navy's newfound confidence, bolstered by its victory, would set the stage for further offensives, including the island-hopping campaign that would eventually bring American forces to Japan's doorstep. Meanwhile, Japan's focus shifted toward conserving its remaining resources and trying to repair the damage done to its fleet. However, the Japanese had already lost too much, both in terms of ships and in terms of their ability to sustain a long-term war in the Pacific. By contrast, the United States had only begun to mobilize. American industrial power, unmatched in scale and reach, would allow the U.S. to replace its losses quickly while Japan struggled to rebuild. Midway had decisively tilted the balance of power in the Pacific, and the coming months would see a shift in momentum that would never be reversed. The Battle of Midway remains one of the most studied and celebrated naval battles in history. It was a victory not just of ships and planes, but of strategy, intelligence, and preparation. The lessons learned at Midway shaped naval tactics and military doctrine for decades, influencing the course of both World War II and the wars that followed. For the United States, Midway marked the beginning of a relentless push through the Pacific that would eventually lead to Japan's surrender in 1945. The victory gave the U.S. Navy the confidence to take on the Japanese Empire and ultimately secure victory in the Pacific. But for Japan, Midway was the beginning of the end. Though they would continue to fight, the war in the Pacific had now become a battle of attrition, one that Japan could not win.